the vision that we painted for ourselves 10 years ago. If you wouldn't let them babysit your kids, what happens if we need to shoot the dog and sell the dogs, right? People are running away from something. There's no way I would spend my life on a.
Welcome back, investor. We have another episode of Passive Income Adventures. Today we have Joe Downs from Philadelphia. Say hello, Joe.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me, Emma.
And for regular listeners of the podcast, a couple of months ago, we interviewed Joe's partner, Tom Dunkel, in the self-storage space and talked a lot about diversification, work optional, being able to retire early, and then figuring out what you do with the rest of your life. And Joe, you and I and Tom are all in a similar situation that way, where we're trying to figure out exactly what we want our lives to look like now that we have kind of achieved that passive income marker that we've all been going after, and then just trying to figure out what life looks like after that. And before the show, I was talking about going on a scuba trip with my husband and my daughter, and they would go scuba all day. And I sat on a beach in Cozumel for, I think it was like an 8 or 9 day trip. I was so bored. And that really gave me a lot to think about. So, for those of you who are new listening to the show, we just talk about passive income, entrepreneurship, how to earn more money so that you can invest more money so that you can then redesign your life, and the choices that come with redesigning your life once you get to that point where you have financial freedom. Do you not work? Do you volunteer? I mean, all of these kinds of things, and just looking at what other people are doing with their financial freedom and how they're making passive income and their lives. That's really what we want to talk about on the show, is just have conversations about the real version of passive income and not like the kind of fakey private jet thing that we see a lot of times when we're looking into this. I think the private jet thing actually makes people afraid, like that this is not even a real thing. It just seems kind of gimmicky. So, Joe, how about you kick us off with telling us a little bit about yourself, how you actually achieved the passive income dream, where you started, how you got there, and what your life is looking like now that you've kind of gotten to the point where you have these decisions that you can make about yourself and how you want to live.
Yeah, for sure. And thank you again for having me. And you're so right. You're referencing the private jets. I think when we were younger, I think we're roughly around the same age. I'm 51, and I apologize if you're not.
No, yeah, pretty close. You and my husband are the same age.
I think it was what was it Carlton Sheets with the Ferrari, right?
Yes.
The Ferrari. Even then, before my mind was ever on the right track, which is this
Hmm.
passive financial, even then I was like, that just looks hokey and fake and
Yeah.
just a load of garbage. So about me, how did we get on this path? I used to raise a lot of money for 1031 exchanges. They were done as syndications and it was all for commercial,
Hmm.
multifamily, office, and some hotel and some distressed debt. Mostly multifamily and office, but I dabbled in hotel, which is important in my maturation process in this business. That comes in later with storage, but that was probably a large part of my background. I wanted to be in real estate for a long time. I worked for the 9 to 5 bureaucratic Fortune 500 companies when I was younger and just hated it. And I can't tell you that my goal was to one day be unemployable, but I achieved it. I realized that later, actually, where the credit markets hemorrhaged and I couldn't raise money anymore. So I was kind of, for lack of a better term, out of work really for a year and a half. And it was that point, and I wasn't even passive yet. I just really loved what I did versus what I used to do. And my wife, well, you go get a job doing it. And I was like, I'll speak my mind too much. I'm not employable anymore. I'm going to go figure this out on my own, become an entrepreneur. And we did. And that's when I met Tom. And he stumbled upon this buying a distressed or reperforming second mortgage. I had just raised a lot of money at where we were paying investors like 6.5 to 7%. Here he was getting a 25% yield from a second mortgage. 25 is insane. And I said, well, that's interesting. There's got to be a lot of margin in this. And long story short, because we're believers in education, I always have been and still educate myself. I will continue to do it. I went to a seminar. It was nice that I knew some of the guys there. So it took some of the fakeness away from it, right? It made it
Yeah.
real and tangible. And, I was that guy in the front just asking question after question and knowing the hell out of them. I realized if they're selling Tom a 25% yield in this product, this investment vehicle they sold him, what was their yield? Right. And I was like, it has to be 50 or more. And that's what just really piqued my interest. And I'm just someone that loves niches. And, if people are running away from something, I'm asking why. Well, sometimes for good reason.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's because they just don't understand it. And I just like to understand, well, which is it? Is it because they don't understand it, or should we all be running from that? And what we found was that they just didn't understand it. And so we ended up building a business in there. And what's funny is in the conversation before we started recording here, and you were talking about how the show goes, you were sparking memories
Mhm.
that I hadn't thought about in a little while. Our goal when we first started, when we first realized what that could be, our goal was to be able to make $1 million a year working 20 hours a week. And you're going to laugh at this, Emma, from a beach.
Yeah. Oh, but
Well, but you have to paint that vision. You don't have to. I don't want to tell anybody what they have to do. We can get into that because there's all kinds of different
Mhm.
flavors. What is passive income? It might mean something different to you than it does to me. But the image we painted for ourselves at that point, just to have a goal, was $1 million a year, working 20 hours a week from an iPad. That was part of it. Very specific, from a beach. Now, that was 15 years ago. No, not 15, 10 years ago. That was 10 years ago. That image was painted. We have not achieved it. We're well on our way to that, very comfortably on our way to that from a financial perspective. But what's interesting, and you could argue we have achieved it. We don't, in that one business, we don't work 20 hours a week. So we've achieved, I don't want to give away what we, wake up January 1st and we're making for the year without working, but it's a healthy amount. Certainly can live on it and do nothing else. Not a million, but also not working 20 hours a week. We have one person that runs the company for us, and we meet on Zoom every 2 weeks for about a half hour. So it's not even an hour a week, right? It's 15 minutes a week. You could argue if there was a ratio there, we have achieved it. And I say it that way because it all depends on your outlook. It feels to me like we achieved the goal, which is we don't have to work, and we don't even work 20 hours a week in that one passive investment, which is more than a passive investment. To be fair, it was a business that we used to work in a lot. That's the part of the conversation we were having before, is what is passive income?
Mhm.
Is it managing short-term rentals? Is it literally just picking investment managers to invest in, sitting back and waiting for the reports and hopefully the checks in the mail or the wires in, right, from your investments? So, but I personally look at like, hey, I've achieved at least a healthy level of passive income because I don't have to do anything if I don't want to. Now, as you and I both decided we are cut from the same cloth,
Yeah.
there's no way that is where we want to be and stay. The vision that we painted for ourselves 10 years ago, $1 million a year, 20 hours a week from a beach, was not very well thought through, because there's no way I would spend my life on a beach similar to your vacation in Mexico, which is, I would go insane. I would
Yeah.
absolutely go insane. I have to do something. I've learned I'm a deal junkie. So that built in the process of building that company and then realizing, hey, I've got all this free time now. What are we going to do? That's when I stumbled upon self storage.
Mhm.
It was literally a marketing email because, and I actually, so the email came from this guy, Scott Myers, who's probably
Yeah.
the leader in self storage education out there
Mhm.
and mentorship. And I didn't know him. By the way, I didn't know the first thing about self storage. And all the commercial real estate conferences I went to, 10 years ago and longer, more than 10 years ago, there was never, ever a self storage company there. I've never rented a self storage unit. I still haven't.
Yeah.
Um, I used to, I guess, drive by them and not notice them, because prior to 6 years ago, when we got into this business, self storage business, I couldn't have told you I have one memory of any self storage facility or anything anywhere. Just was not in my world. What was interesting about the email that I got, and why did I get it? Probably because, like you, we used to speak at a lot of alternative investment conferences on distressed debt. I've been to them too as a consumer of the information, because I'm always looking for other asset classes to invest in passively. I like managing and buying and the deal making, if you will, and distressed debt. I do get involved in that part. That's the little bit I work a year, the actual deal making. I love the deal making in self storage and the operating of it. I'm light on the operation, but I like the deal making.
Yeah.
Um,
That's me too.
so, yeah, yeah, let the experts in on it. But I don't love the deal making in other investments, asset classes that I passively invest in, if that makes sense.
Mm.
That's where I rely. I love the asset classes, right? So a lot of people come to us and say, and self storage, and they say, "Oh, I heard about self storage. I want to get into self storage because I'm in multifamily and I want to get self storage." And I always say, "Well, pump the brakes. Self storage is wonderful, active and passive, or even semi active or semi passive, depending on your outlook. It's not necessarily, doesn't necessarily need to replace multifamily. I love multifamily too as a passive investor, as long as I'm investing in an operator that I know, like, and trust, and want to. And that's with any investment class, whether it's hard money lending or or multifamily or mobile home parks or, whatever it is. But if you can find the right operator that you trust, know, and like, then the passive investing world it's a really wide world of involvement, whether, completely passive or into active. I love what you're doing with this podcast because it's really opening people's minds to what is passive investing. But I hope people don't get pigeonholed into any one definition of it because I think it's really personal. I think it really
Yeah.
comes out to what's relatively passive to you might be relatively active to me or vice versa.
Yeah, and that's a good point. I think even when you look up passive income on, like, Investopedia, there's no real official financial definition for it. It just says that it's a source of income that requires little to no ongoing maintenance, and I think that's where people get, pretty tripped up. To me, I, further restrict that definition to be it's investing in a business that you don't own or run, because I told my husband recently, he always has business ideas, stuff he wants to do, and I'm like, I'm not doing that because I know that while everything is going smoothly, it can be pretty passive, pretty hands off, right? But as soon as there's a problem, like take a multifamily, for example, your property manager's handling everything, but then you have some kind of an insurance claim or some like a weather event, or suddenly the property is struggling and you need to put money in and you need to be more hands on. It's like everything is great when it's going well, but then when it's not going well, you have to step in. Where I don't consider that passive. I consider that kind of like teenagers. You never know when they're going to need you. But when they do, it's a really big deal. It's like, come pick me up from jail. I just got arrested for a DUI or something like that. You're like, oh my goodness. And you don't need to be with them all the time anymore, but when they do really need you, they really need you. So for
Yep.
me, passive income is like somebody else's business. Like I literally do not run this. I have no legal rights to even vote. I mean, maybe some shareholder voting, but to me, passive income is really, really, really hands off.
I
I'm not
love
in control at all.
I love that analogy and it resonates with me because as I'm preparing the other night, I was up in Buffalo preparing for I live and work outside of Philadelphia, but I had a investment pitch for this, deal we're doing, and I was up in Buffalo. And as I'm preparing for it, my daughter's calling me, who just got her license on Tuesday.
Oh no.
Car won't start. I'm like, okay, I can do this right now. But you have to because to your point, they need you. That's a great analogy.
Yeah. Well, and to me, it's kind of wondering about your distress note business and your self storage business because one takes very, very little time. Did you go into the self storage side of things specifically because you felt like you had some time to spend and build a business? You mentioned you still have kids at home, so it's not like you can just be moving around or going to beaches all the time because they have school, friends, sports, and things that they're doing. So it's a little bit more geographically I don't wanna say limited. What's the word we're looking for? Like, you have a geography that you are dedicated to because you have family who have lives there. And but then when people retire and suddenly they're off in Thailand or whatever, and they're leaving their kids stateside because they're married and have kids of their own. So this kind of early retirement brings with it an extra layer of responsibility because we may still have kids at home and responsibilities and things that we've, committed to. So what did that look like for you when you're like, "Okay, now what do I do?"
So great point. So I have financial freedom, but I have no other life freedom, right? I'm tethered to the Philadelphia area unless we move the entire family somewhere else.
Yeah, and
Then I've got
teenagers are like
and my daughters, dance. Then my boys play football, basketball, lacrosse, but obviously they're in school. So, and then you're limited to even then. By the way, we have. I mean, you want to get into my personal life, right? The
sure.
which is involves with passive investing involved because we have Airbnbs that we
Yeah.
manage, the Poconos, and then in Sea City, New Jersey, and then one down in Hilton Head. And we can't even use them all the time. So we rent them out passively. To your point, though, is that passive because we're on the Airbnb app. But to your point, I have financial freedom, but I don't have life freedom. I can't just pick up and travel the world. Not yet. My youngest is 12. So
Yeah.
we've been doing this for 10 years. So I've been on this band where there's really, in all practicality, because I know I could homeschool, I guess. You hear people doing that and you could travel the world. All right. Well, that's again, to each his own. That's not me.
I have to tell you, we homeschool and we traveled full time for the last 2 years, and my homeschooled children were like, "I'm done. Can we please go back to a house?" No,
Homeschooling sounds like work.
yeah, well,
Yes.
it's actually that's another thing, that's another episode, but the way I homeschool is really a lot easier than public school because we did that for a while, but I feel like you still have to answer to the other people that you live with because their
Yeah.
opinions on where they wanna live and the lifestyle they want, even just with my husband. I'll give you an example. I told my kids we're going to Spain in 2 years for the eclipses, and we're gonna spend a year there. And my 16-year-old's like, "I'm not going over there. I'll be 18. I'm off to college." And I'm like, "I'm not leaving you in a US college while I leave when at 18." And she has an August birthday, so she just turned 18, like, 5 minutes later, go off to college. Said, "I'm not leaving you there at basically 17 years old while I go off to Spain for a year. So if she doesn't wanna go, like, none of us go." So that's the kind of stuff that even though you feel like you have financial freedom, and us homeschooling location freedom, there are other people and obligations and commitments. Mine just look a little bit different than yours do.
I 100% agree with you. My wife's in pharmaceuticals. One company she worked for 2 years ago, it didn't happen, but we were on the verge of having to move to Denmark
Mhm.
for like 2 years,
Yeah.
and the kids were 3 of
Uh,
them. And it was a knockdown, drag out. It's not happening. Now we're the parents, we could have forced it, right? But it would have
Yep.
been, I mean, you talk about terrible, right? And I could have worked from there because
Remote.
I have financial freedom. And I could literally I could have run my company that I'm currently running now from there. It would have been a little more challenging, but to your point, you have other people you answer to. They have lives, they have brains, they have ideas, they have thoughts,
Mhm.
and they weren't having it.
Is that kinda why you're like, "This self-storage thing looks kinda interesting because we have these commitments to people and places."
Yeah, so I'm not going anywhere. So this is going back like 6 or 7 years. I'm like,
Okay.
I'm not going anywhere. I have nothing to do, and I love golf, but I can't play golf every day.
No.
I mean, you go on a golf trip after 3 days, I'm like, "All right, I'm done.
Yep.
I need a break." And then, I can't sit on the porch and read the paper, and I can't sit on a beach and, just read a book or bake in the sun. I'm Irish too, that doesn't help. We've limits to sun exposure on our skin, but so, it was and let's be honest, you have to know yourself too. Like the beauty and I realize you've different people listening to this podcast, and it hits home differently for different people. There are those that are working that 9 to 5 right now and just want to get to the point of financial freedom.
Yeah.
And we could talk for days on this podcast about all the different ways you can do that. And I'd love to touch on some of those. And then you have those that have reached it or have the ability tomorrow to go completely passive because they build up that nest egg, but they're still working because they don't know what to do. They don't. It can be crippling, right? Just decisions, and you build up the nest egg and you don't want to lose it. But for me, sorry to bring it back to me, I hit that point where okay, we've got the passive income now. What do we want to do with it? And that's where I got that email, and it just hit home for me. Self storage, which I think is a question you asked me. We got lost, but like
Yeah.
it's you and I could go on for hours.
About
Yeah,
conversations and going where the
right.
conversation leads, so
But
appreciate it.
I hit that email just hit me differently when it was, I think it even probably talked about passive investing in self storage. And it was kind of a promo that was a little bit of a hit against multifamily because it said something like, it's like multifamily with all the tenants, toilets, and trash. And
Mhm.
that's kind of true, but you still have tenants and sometimes they leave trash. That's what I always joke about. But you don't have the toilets and you don't have bats flying in windows in the middle of the night and roofs leaking. Not to say that a self storage roof can't leak, but it's just not very typical. And really, what it is, there's no emergencies. There's no emergencies in self storage.
Mm.
Very somewhat, it's going to sound weird for me to say this to you after the way we opened up earlier, but it's a somewhat simple business, yet you need to know it to actually understand how to underwrite it and run it and manage it. We're not launching rockets, right? Or I guess today we're not catching rockets back then.
Yeah.
But you don't have to be a rocket science to run this business. If you can understand and comprehend multifamily, you're 80% of the way there. You just need the lingo and the nuances to self storage. That's probably the same with most commercial real estate asset classes. I know you mentioned, mobile home parks, for instance. It's probably the same thing. If you self storage or multifamily, proficient person is probably about 80% of the way there with mobile homes as well. The other thing that hit me about storage was this is where maybe because of my background raising money for multifamily and hotels hit me was, hotel you manage, it's a nightly contract, right? You're really managing by the night. In multifamily, you have an annual lease. It's an annual contract, it's a lease, and you're a landlord. Another big difference. Storage, you manage by the month. It's a monthly contract. And here's the real big difference. You're not a landlord. We don't take we don't take any bailey rights to any of your possessions. We just provide you with a space and you lock up that space and we don't have access to it. So it's very different in that, Again, a hotel, you're managing those rates nightly. It's very operationally intensive. You're raising your rates, lowering your rates depending on supply and demand. In storage, you're doing the same thing. You're just doing it monthly. So you don't have to react as quickly, but you also, you're not trying to steer an aircraft carrier in a multifamily where, you can't raise the rents for another year. You can't move somebody out or, if you're making improvements to it's when someone moves out, right? It's a little slower unless you're buying and then rehabbing something. It's a little slower, right, to make the changes in multifamily. So again, I'm not knocking multifamily. I invest passively in multifamily with operators that I know, like, and trust. But from an operational standpoint, for someone who doesn't have to work, I get to I'm jealous of you, by the way. You get to do podcasts
Yeah.
and I know you do other stuff. To me, this would be nothing but fun. Just talking to
Yeah.
people, interviewing them, curious about, how you do you, right? And why you do you. But for me, I had the luxury of, and I got to the point where I was able to have the luxury of deciding, well, what is the next move? And is it going to be storage or not? And what I liked about storage, and again, you could be as active as you want in storage, as passive you want, or storage is unique too, because there's a whole world in between. Be kind of semi active and you can plug and play different things. It's to your point, unless you're completely passive in a fund or, let's say an investor of ours, one of our deals, unless you're that passive where you have no voting rights and no control, it's like having a teenager because things can happen, right? But the difference is, this is where your analogy is maybe off point. They can produce a lot of money for you, and teenagers don't do that. They just
Yeah.
cost you.
Yeah, no
Really,
nobody CPA says you should pay your teenagers to work for you for a tax write-off. I'm like, "They're still not making me any money." That's a really good point. I feel like what we're talking about is finding something that you can do actively that you can really sink your teeth into, and then supplementing that income with passive. For us, that's running a real estate business. I run a private fund. We do hard money loans, occasional equity deals. You're running your self-storage. Your other business is more hands-off with the distress notes, but then you're doing things that are truly passive limited partner stuff. And a lot of our investors come to us and they're like sales executives and they're really good at it, or they run a business like a blue collar business. Maybe they're a landscaper or something. They're doing really well because if you could run a landscaping business professionally, there's a lot of demand there. And so they do very well with it. And they're like, I don't want a real estate business. I am a landscaper or I'm a sales exec or I'm a lawyer, or whatever it is that they are. And finding that active calling, it's like, this is my thing. This is what I was professionally put on earth to do, at least for the next 5 to 10 years. I keep changing, but I feel like that active versus passive argument, sometimes we're missing the point that what are you doing that's active? It can be a real estate business or it cannot be a real estate business. And for most people, the answer is not a real estate business, some other sort of active income. But we all need something to keep us busy and feel competent at that we feel like is giving something into the world that is fulfilling. So, give me your thoughts about that versus what are we doing actively? Doesn't necessarily have to be real estate.
my God, you don't want me going down this rabbit hole of philosophical thoughts. I agree with everything you said, and I always bring it back to each his own, right? So what is passive to me might be active to others. And it also is, where are we coming from? Do we make a lot of W-2 income and do we love what we do? If we love what we do and are making a lot of money, then the decision we're making, if we're listening to this podcast, I should probably be doing other things that are passive that are helping me grow my investments outside of the stock market or, inclusive of the stock market, but outside of it because you want something asymmetrical, but also from a tax standpoint, right? So how are we setting ourselves up in the future? And this is where a lot of people come to us because with self storage, we buy facilities, we provide passive opportunities, like completely passive opportunities, right? But then we also have a consulting business. So we help folks, facilities, source them, help them underwrite, negotiate, place them in them. And they come in two different types of people. They're either going to outsource the management of them and be pretty passive, but to your point, have a teenager, right, that has the chance of making money or should make the money. They're kind of more semi-active, semi-passive, meaning these self-storage facilities you can kind of manage on your own depending on the setup. And then we have folks that come to us. So they're looking to do that just for supplemental income, to grow wealth, whatever. Then we have folks that come to us and say, look, my goal is to get out of my W-2 income. I hate my job. I would love to find another way place all of that income in the next 3 to 5 years. How can I do that? And I mean, if I just look around the mastermind that I belong to in self storage, there's any number of folks that have done that. They love their job. They've got a lot of income, and that income helps them invest passively or helps them buy their first storage facility or their second one. I just spent last week with a husband and wife. In 3 years, he was able to replace all of his income and quit his job that had him traveling 3 weeks out of the month. He hated it. And they just had a granddaughter. And now he gets to spend time with the granddaughter. They have three smaller self storage facilities. But to them, this is back to my point, what is passive and what is active? To each his own. They manage those self storage facilities completely themselves. That doesn't mean that they're there every day, and they answer phone calls when they come in, and sometimes they're there maybe once or twice a week. They're not sitting behind a desk, waiting for a customer to walk in the door. So to them, that's completely passive. To you, Emma,
Totally not.
there's a lot of gray area between the black and the white. To you, you're very black and white, and God bless you for that. For many others, there's a lot of gray that feels more black or more white, whatever you want it to feel. Right. And then there's people like me that for the lifestyle we live, I could just do nothing pretty much. Control things, right? And do not, but
Yeah.
I can't, I just can't. I got to do something, and I got to be active. And to me, it's fun. And that's the word that we haven't really talked about is fun. So what is financial freedom? And my wife always says that she still works for the Fortune 500 big pharma. And I don't know if it's Fortune 500, but the big pharma. And she's always brings up the word retirement. Retirement to me is, I don't even know how, I can't define it. I know what the picture is supposed to be. And I used to be a financial advisor when I was 22 years old. So I've sold retirement plan, like financial plans. So I know what it's supposed to, like the textbook, if you're flipping through a book and this is, here's retirement. I know what the brochure looks like, but that's not retirement to me. Retirement to me is being able to do whatever I want when I want to do it within reason. I have certain life responsibilities, but I don't even like the word. To be honest with you, I
Yeah.
like financial freedom because I'm 51. When I'm 81, I still won't be sitting on a porch reading a newspaper. Maybe I'll have more, medical appointments than I
Yeah.
don't do today, but I'll be doing deals. I hope to be helping my kids do whatever they want to do, deals or maybe watching their kids. I don't know, but I won't be retired. I know that in
Yeah.
the conventional sense, waiting for my social security check to come and probably never will for us. But that to me, the picture I'm trying to paint is not the picture that most people think of with retirement. It's still being active and both physically, but more importantly, mentally, because
Okay.
I don't think I could do it. Look, a day on the beach, maybe two, is we all need that, right? But or just a day to do nothing. I'm, that's very valuable time that our brains and our bodies need to heal and be refreshed. I can't. Oh my god, I can't do it every day. Can you imagine waking up and be like, I have no idea what I'm doing today? Every day?
Every
Here,
day.
there, it's nice, but every day? No
Yeah,
thank.
I do still really look forward to weekends, which is kind of funny because being self-employed and, semi-retired, let's call it, there's still a lot of stuff that we're doing during the week, and sometimes I'll wake up and it's Saturday, and I'm so excited because our kids aren't really into sports, so I don't have to spend all day at a soccer tournament, but I know in the past I've never shared this story with you, but I know I've shared this story on the podcast before. When we lived in Austin, we were at a block party, and we were just meeting our neighbors, and some new people had moved in. And what do you do? The regular conversation. And he says, I own a bunch of self storage units. I develop luxury air conditioned self storage. And we were like, wow, that sounds pretty interesting. Tell us more about that. And because we were entrepreneurial and kind of investor minded, but we didn't ever do anything. We are kind of those people who just talked about it a lot and always still living paycheck to paycheck and really thinking like, how can we break out of this? I'd read Rich Dad Poor Dad years before. And so he started talking and I was just fascinated. And then he made a comment how he's in school, I think, to become like a family therapist or something. And I said, really, that's kind of a departure from what you're doing. And he said, it just gets to the point where making money is like so easy that it just doesn't even hold your attention anymore. And I thought, what would that be like? And I think he was probably about 50, probably about our age. And so he started kind of mentoring us through the self-storage thing, and we started looking at properties, and we were still Dave Ramsey, didn't want to take on any debt, didn't really understand how to take on investors. And then when we really got serious about it after we left Austin and got to Salt Lake City, we got serious. We joined some masterminds, some clubs, associations, and we realized like how to do it and started looking at for it pretty hard, and then eventually landed in multifamily because one of the people in my network for self-storage was selling her multifamily so that she could go buy more self-storage, and that was just an easy buy, and that's kinda how I fell into multifamily was via the self-storage route. But I just remember looking at that, and as he was mentoring us over the following years, just realized, like, what would that be like? To just say, "I wanna change careers. I wanna spend more time at home with my little kids. Making money is really not that interesting for me anymore." And just getting to that point and wondering what that life would be like. Meeting people who have done that
Mm.
really altered my path. And so it sounds like you had a similar experience in masterminds and in networking where you're like, "Oh, this is a thing. And maybe I could just do this for a while." And then you get to that point where you have to figure out like, "Well, okay, how do I get there?" Because we have 2 listeners here. One trying to figure out how to get there, and the other who's like, "Well, I'm kinda there, and I don't know where to go from here."
Yeah.
So, you having been through that, how would you advise both of those listeners?
So listener one is trying to get there, education.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean go back to school and get a degree. That means, well, you're listening to this podcast, step one. I'll tell you this. So Scott Myers has an academy, Self-Storage Academy, where he teaches
Mhm.
people how to. I now actually MC and teach and speak at his academies. He has them 4 times a year. And I'm telling you this because I open up with, I congratulate everyone for being there, for starters, because just by being in that room, they're doing what they are one percenters. And I'm being generous when I say 1% because it's really less than 1% actually takes that first step to even try to start educating yourself in something new. And it doesn't have to be self-storage. It could be multifamily. It could be hard money lending conferences. It could be, there's any number of things you can do. There's any number of ways to make money. It could be tax liens, right? But the fact that you took a step in that direction, whatever that direction is, it's an alternative investment direction. It's a direction to better yourself and to give yourself a chance because it's not all about the W-2 income in the stock market, right? And I don't mean to offend anyone. I say it, but you're just sheep following the crowd if that's what you're doing. So I always congratulate people. Say, look, you're a top 1%er now. And then I share with them this analogy, and I hope this resonates for most people, especially for the tier one person that's listening. Most people go through life as if you're playing the game Monopoly. And you're just rolling the dice, you're just going around the board, collecting $200 every time you go around, right? Your income, and hoping to avoid paying taxes and stay out of jail.
Yeah.
Imagine playing the game Monopoly and never buying a property, just going around the board. It doesn't, it's just an analogy that hopefully hits home. You don't have to buy single family homes or multifamily or self storage. You could invest, either start lending money, hard money lending, or invest with a hard money lender. There are ways, mobile homes, there's any number of, you could buy ATMs and start an ATM business. It's not going to be as passive as some other things. There's levels of passive and to each his own. I keep talking about that, but there are other ways to make money with the money that you have made and saved. And it doesn't all have to be that passive. So 2 different groups. Like the first group, which is trying to get there. First, you're listening to this podcast, and that's step one. In fact, I teach and coach for Scott Myers, who is the lead educator out there, who's been doing it the longest for self storage. He has an academy that you can go and learn all about self storage and a mentorship program. He's asked me to MC and speak at that academy. And so I open it up every time. We do it 4 times a year. And I open it up with congratulating the people that are in the room, the 50, 60, 70 people in the room, because they're the true 1%ers, meaning they've taken that first step or second step in that case. First step is like listening to a podcast like this. The second is actually starting to take some action. And that action is some getting education, right? And this is for both groups, continuing to educate. And I'll get to the second group in a second. But one of the things I say in the academy when I open up is imagine playing the game Monopoly and going around the board and never buying a property, right? You're just rolling the dice. You're just going around the board, trying to stay out of jail, trying not to pay taxes, collecting your $200. There are 99+% of people that live in the United States and maybe the world go through life as if they're playing the game Monopoly without ever buying a property, right? And I'm not saying you have to buy real estate. You could do other things. You can lend hard money. You can there's any number of different things you can do. State based, it is one of the oldest investments. I think lending actually, it is one of the oldest investments. And we love real estate and it's a great place to start. So the fact that you're listening to this podcast is step one. Step two, go find something that interests you or go to all of them. Go to as many as you can. Learn about self-storage, learn about multifamily, learn about hard money lending, learn about whatever else you find about it, and then figure out what your skill sets are, what you like to do. For me, I love it. Storage is metal boxes, but I love it. Right. I'm a deal junkie. And that's why I found that I love the art of the deal and I love going where people are running from. And I love niches, but that's me. You got to find what you love and what you're good at. And then for the second kind of class of people that maybe you've made it, you've got the money, you could start being passive tomorrow. What do you do? Same thing. Go get educated. The only difference between you and the person that is, the kind of the tier one is you've got money. That's the only difference. So go get educated. Go to the same academies I'm talking about. See which one fits who you are. Maybe you're a doctor, a lawyer, accountant, the proverbial doctor, lawyer, accountant, who loves your job and has no thoughts of quitting anytime soon or retiring anytime soon, but you got a lot of money and you're looking to diversify and grow wealth, and maybe you're looking for tax plays. You still have to get educated. You need to know what you're about to invest in, whether it's very passive, somewhat passive, or active. You need to know and understand and learn about the different investment options, right? You don't need to become an expert, but you do need to become dangerous with your knowledge, man, right? You really should understand either what you're investing, actually always what you're investing in, but if it's going to be passive investing in. And for something like that, we wrote whatever the lightest, smallest we could call a book is, or an ebook, booklet, or something. We wrote one years ago because of our own personal experiences of actually losing money with sponsors. So we wrote this kind of downloadable PDF called this Safe Investing Method, and it's SAFE as an acronym, and it stands for S is for sponsor, A is for asset, F is for financials, and E is for exit. So you need to know first and foremost if you're going to invest passively, who are you trusting? I kept referring to, you got to know and trust who you're investing in. Who are they? Are they upstanding people? Have they had success before? What's the reporting look like? Would you have them babysit your kids? If you would have them babysit your kids, then maybe give them money. If you wouldn't let them babysit your kids, maybe you shouldn't invest in them, right? Maybe you shouldn't give them your money to babysit. And then what is the asset? Have you done any due diligence on the asset? Do you just like the sponsor? I guess that's okay if you just like the sponsor, but you should probably know a thing or two about the asset. By the way, is it coming with tax benefits for you? You could have 3 sponsors you love, but if one of them has tax benefits and you're in a high tax bracket, maybe that's one you should be looking at. And then the financials, how are they being reported to you? What are they? Are they meeting their expectations? Are they delivering to you what you thought? And by the way, is what they're projecting reasonable? And if you can't ascertain that yourself, who's looking over your shoulder? Have you had anybody else look at it? This is all before you invest. And then exit. What is your exit plan? How do you get out of this thing? What if all hell breaks loose? A pandemic comes, another pandemic happens. There's an old saying that these Wharton guys that used to invest with us used to say is, what happens if we need to shoot the dog and sell the dog, right? What's the doghouse worth? It's a terrible analogy. I get it, but it makes a point. How am I getting out of this thing if all else fails on the worst case scenario? But even the best case scenario, is this a 3 to 5 year projection? Does that line up for me? Or is this am I in this for 5 years? It could be 7, right? What is my exit? These are all the things you should know before you invest in anything and anyone.
Yeah, and such a great point because you said you lost money with sponsors, and when
Mhm.
you can take that experience and put it into digestible format for people to be able to learn from, because I think people feel incompetent to read the materials that are coming to them from the sponsor and be able to make decisions based on the pitch deck, the financials. They don't feel confident that they can do it. But then there's that added fear to the top of that, like, well, what if I just go ahead and make the decision anyway, not feeling quite 100% secure? doing this, and then I lose money. And so some of us who have been through some things can just put that information out there in a digestible booklet format and say, here are some of the lessons that I learned. Like, here's what's important and here's what's not important. I hear too many investors getting caught up in like, oh, well, I don't know what debt yield is. And that was in the pitch deck. So I must not be able to invest because I don't know what that is. Right. And focusing on the wrong things
Yeah.
versus focusing on what's most important. So where can people get a copy of that booklet so that they can learn the priorities?
Yeah, actually, if we can make it available to you, but if you go to our website, belrosestorage.com, it's just a free download right there.
Yeah.
belrosestorategroup.com.
Are you I always say when you're getting started in passive investing, because when I didn't start in passive investing, my husband had just gotten a new job and I knew that I had a 5 to maybe 7-year horizon before I could retire him from that job. And I needed to keep myself busy for about 5
Retire him. I love
years.
the way you said that. Retire him.
Retire, basically leave corporate, right? And I'm like, okay, this is going to take 5 to 7 years. And so I didn't want to start investing passively right away because I wanted something active in a job. I'd left my business behind in Austin and I was like, should I restart it? Should I? I didn't know what to do. So I decided I would run a real estate business. So that's really where my decision making came in from. But now that I'm shifting more over to passive investing and being less and less on the active sponsor side, I realized that the lessons that I learned as a brand new real estate entrepreneur were the same as if I had been a brand new passive investor. Like, what does sponsor even mean? What's a
Yeah.
syndication? What's a cash on cash return? What's the difference between ROI and IRR and AAR? All of those kinds of financial metrics I was learning, how to choose a location, all of those types of lessons, we all start in the same place. The first two chapters of becoming a real estate entrepreneur are the same as becoming a passive investor. And so something like this, what would you say if you're looking at the safe, those priorities, which do you find to be the most lacking most often? For me, it's the financials. I feel like a lot of smaller operators don't really know how to have good reporting and financials, but I don't know. It seems like the sponsor part is more important. So what do you see there as a weakness?
From the sponsors,
It's just like if you took all 4 of those letters, SAFE, and you look at just all the options that are out there, where do you see people are falling down the most often or not providing what they need to from a if a passive investor is gonna choose to invest in somebody, where do you see the biggest weakness on there?
let me answer it this way because I'm not really sure whether you're coming from it. Where do I see the biggest weakness in sponsors or where?
In sponsors, yeah.
Okay, I'll answer your question, but here's what I'll tell you I think is the most important letter is that if I'm a passive investor, what's the most important letter is one way to look at that question. It's the sponsor.
Mhm.
Because if the sponsor isn't competent or trustworthy, it almost doesn't matter what the asset class is. Now, from a sponsor's point of view, which I think is maybe the question you are asking, there's a lot of sponsors out there with a lot of good ideas. It's the execution of those ideas that are the most important, right? It's the operations of
Mhm, mhm.
the investment is. And I think you're going to find that in the sponsor themselves. So if you're evaluating different investments and you're using the safe method as a checklist, I think the lack of operations, I'm answering your question, doesn't sound like it. I think a lot of people have good ideas. When I say people, sponsors, a lot of sponsors have good ideas. I think they lack in the execution of those ideas.
Mhm.
That's where they shortchange themselves the most. They try to do it all because maybe they themselves have quit a job and they're relying on that income that from the investment, from the money they're raising. And not that doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad in itself. I'm just saying that is more likely where start to find problems because they're not well capitalized, meaning they're not well enough capitalized to operate. And it's the operations, whether it's multifamily or self-storage or even a hard money lending business. I've seen them. We have one where we're winding it down and we weren't the best operators at the end and we're paying for it. Now, none of our investors, we are. But my point is, I can say that from experience. If you're not operating a hard money lending business as effectively as maybe you guys are, the sponsor themselves can go belly up and lose money for investors along the way. So it's really the most the sponsor's the most critical. Where the sponsors, I think, have the most or where they get into trouble, necessarily the idea or the asset class.
Hmm.
And by the way, and they all have the best of intentions going in. It's just
Hopefully. You have
you
so
need fraud.
for the
See,
most part.
fraud. I would say 90 plus percent,
Mhm.
99% plus have are good, upstanding people with all the best intentions going in. From there, things can get out of control. But I think they do get out of control because they aren't as well capitalized. Not necessarily. Well, maybe what part of the reason is that at the end of the day, they aren't as operationally as effective. Some
Mhm.
could be because they're not as well capitalized. Some of it because maybe they bit off more than they could chew. But if I'm an investor looking, and I am, and the first thing I look at, so this isn't just, I'm not prescribing you medication. This is the medication I take. Um, I want to know to. I'll spend more time on the sponsor, who they are, what they know, what they don't know, and how they're going to execute on whatever this plan says, this pro forma or this offering memorandum or whatever it says. I want to know who they are and how they're going to actually execute it. They think they're going to execute it, and what business do they have telling me that they're going to execute it? Having been doing this for 10 years, this is a good idea that you read about last week, or you just came out of an academy or mastermind, and you're going to do it for the first time. Nothing wrong with that. We did. Who did it with you? Who guided you through that as a sponsor? Everybody's sponsor's got to start somewhere, right? But who's your team on your team? Who's making sure that you're going to execute in the future? Right?
And
It's, I'm
not the
not,
guy signing on the loan. Like, that I think that's one he's often put forward as the most experienced guy on the team for a new team who doesn't know what they're doing, like, "Oh, he's been doing this for 25 years," or whatever, but he's just signing on the loan, and he's not in there on the operations or the financial management, like, experience, and I think that's a common,
just might
way to
be
onboard people.
wealthy guy signing on the loan
Yeah.
that's
He's
equal.
not running it. So, like, find out who's actually running it. So sponsor being the most important part, like, safe, that I agree, that's the most important part. And I think the other things underscore they're like data points that are showing you, is that sponsor actually gonna do can they do what they say they're gonna do? And for me, like, when I mentioned weak financials, I find that newer operators often don't know what they're doing on the financial side of things, and they're not giving good reports, and it to me, it's not as important as a good sponsor, but a good sponsor will know financials. And so if you're seeing weak financials, that's a red flag that maybe this is a weak sponsor.
And have them to provide,
Yeah.
right? And so if you look at the safe checklist, part of your due diligence on the sponsor is going to be asking those questions. Well, how often do you report? Can I see a sample of what you report? If they can't provide that, then that's telling you a lot about how they run their operation, right? If
Mhm.
they don't have financial reports for my company, we own storage facilities. If we don't have financial reports and quarterly reports, even some great monthly, but if at the very least quarterly, saying this is what this asset's doing, good or bad. If they don't have that, and they should be showing you their good ones, right? So if they're not even showing that, you really need to be questioning who you're investing in, not what you're investing in, but who you're investing in.
Mhm.
For the stewards of your money, not the asset itself.
Yeah.
Any incompetent sponsor can take a great asset and screw it up.
Ruin it. Mhm.
They
Yeah.
can't.
They say you make your money on the buy, but I've seen people ruin good deals before by running them poorly, and I think this is where the increased risk from private placements versus, say, publicly traded assets comes from. Private placements as a whole tend to outperform public assets, right? Public is a lot safer because you've got the acid tests and the regulations and all of the things that they have to go through to even become publicly traded. And
I never
private
like.
assets are exempt from a lot of that. But the thing is I think people say, oh, well, they're exempt from a lot of that, so it must be riskier. Not all
No,
of the private placement operators are running a tight ship the way that public is, and there's no guarantee there either. I just feel like it's learning how to avoid the people who don't know what they're doing or the people who have maybe been bad actors in the past, if we can learn to avoid them, then we have very high chances of success in outperforming other publicly traded assets. Do you find that to be the biggest hurdle for a private investor to find the good sponsors from the
I do.
ones who can qualify?
I do. We rely sometimes foolishly on word of mouth.
Mhm.
I say sometimes, it's usually a good thing, especially if Emma, if you're referring me to a sponsor that you've invested in for years,
Yes.
that should say a lot. Oh, they can take their eye off the ball. But and that's where that quarterly report. So how are they operating? Are they consistently operating? Is it a machine they've built, or was it good for years and all of a sudden they seem to be taking a lot more vacations and there's
Yeah, I think I know.
all of a sudden you're seeing their feet on Facebook or on the beach. And I'm
Mhm.
like, hey, shouldn't you be operating my facility or multifamily or whatever it is? So it's certainly they're harder to find. Word of mouth is part of it. The podcast is part of it. Now I'm not sure you're not making any recommendations, but just wherever you're hearing about a sponsor, or learning from one, or conferences are great. Go to alternative investment conferences. There, if you Google them, there's any number of them. They're great places to go and meet sponsors. Just because they're there doesn't mean that they're a great sponsor, by the way. So
Yeah.
you're starting your due diligence at the point of meeting the sponsor. But the question was, how can you find them? Those are any number of ways. Obviously, Googling, people find us because they want to be in self storage. So we're putting self storage content out there and they're finding us because they find us. And just because we have content doesn't mean we're a good sponsor. You need to go through that safe list, say, ask us the questions, put us through the ringer. The way I always look at it is and if you're not sure if you're putting us through the ringer and you're still not sure, ask yourself, could you be the CEO of my company? Meaning, have I surrounded myself? Yeah, maybe you're not in storage, Emma. You admitted earlier you don't know how to evaluate storage. That's fine. Could you be the CEO of my company? You should be able to say yes, because you could. That means I've built a good company because
Oh,
I shouldn't
true.
be the one who's evaluating every deal. I should have surrounded myself with a team that is. So my
Mhm.
company's track record needs to be there, but could you insert yourself as the CEO and still run it? I'm not saying take it from where it is today and grow it 100 times, whatever. That might be a different skill set that I have that maybe you don't. Maybe I don't have that, by the way. But could you insert yourself today as the CEO of my company? And the answer should be yeah, because everyone around him knows what they're doing and knows what's going.
Mhm.
And that's to me, that's a simple litmus test.
Yeah, having those systems and processes. I have found sometimes let's take a REIT, for example. They're really large. They've built a machine around how they manage these, but that's expensive. And so I find that the better operators who are more experienced with more track record and have better systems and processes around them tend to offer lower returns as a generality, just because of those increases in expenses. And plus, when you're really good at what you don't have to give the whole farm to the investors, you get to keep a little bit more for yourselves. And I think a lot of investors get really enticed by really high, IRR because maybe
Yeah.
that's the only metric they know, and they don't know how to compare that to some of the other factors. Have you seen some of that going on? Like, the better people get at something, the more systematized, the less returns they tend to offer, and they underpromise, hopefully overdeliver, so
100.
that sexy
We're
IRR is tough
I
to
I know plenty of sponsors that used to offer 15, 16% IRRs and are down to 9 and 10 now. That's because they're buying bigger, more competitive class A stuff,
Yep.
right? A lot of that has to do with the fact that they're a machine and they deliver them out. Now they probably have more overhead too. There's other factors involved, but the bottom line is they don't have to chase the investor yield as much as they used. That's a fact of that's just a part of being a sponsor. We're constantly trying to not that we don't want to deliver the best possible yield we can to our investors. We do. As we look at deals as a sponsor, we have to keep our investors in mind. As an investor, you should not be chasing yield. That's maybe where you start. But if you find a sponsor that today is at 15% and they've delivered and delivered and delivered, and next year they're delivering 13, and 2 years from now they're delivering 11 consistently, that's a sponsor you should continue to ride. Not saying, sorry, I'm trying this new guy because he's delivering 15, 18, whatever. That could work out. You could also lose your investment.
Yeah.
I as a historically, the stock market yields 7.8% if you can time it. Historically, any alternative investment sponsor that's delivering 9, 10, 11, 12% consistently is crushing it. And from a risk reward
Yes.
adjusted basis is crushing it. For you to abandon them once you've found them, I'm chastising you. You know who you are. I'm looking at you right now. You for you to abandon them because they're consistently delivering for you, be it a couple percentage points less, which really just means they're continuing to bring down your risk is is an insane move on your part, in my opinion. That's my humble opinion. You can't, you really should not be chasing yield. Yield is what you look at to start with. We're all human. I look at yield as well. But if you're giving me an option, a sponsor I know at a 12 yield all day long, because I know they're under promising and probably going to beat that, and a new one at 15, 16, let's just talk about the difference. So on $100,000 investment, 12 yield is 12,000. A 15 yield is 15,000. For so $3,000 is not nothing, but $3,000 is the risk I just took on the new. By the way, that's not the risk I just took. That's the reward. Risk I took was 100, right? So I'm risking 100 grand to try to squeeze out an extra three
3.
instead of almost a, can't use the word guaranteed, but damn near close guaranteed 12
Yeah.
risk for three. I think you should be questioning
Yeah.
that decision right there. Those sponsors are, they're not hard to find. And I know they're not hard to find, but they're not growing on trees, right? You can find them if you're in this world, if you're listening to podcasts like this, you're in the right places. You're going to find them. I wouldn't abandon them just because you've seen them mature in their as a company, which means they're maturing even within the niche that they specialize in. And to do, they have to and deliver less risk and more, probably a better investor experience to you. Their yield comes down. I would ride with them all day long
Yeah.
versus somebody new.
It's such a good way to put it. You've risked $100,000 for a possible reward of an extra $3,000. And the larger projects we do and the larger funds that we sponsor, and the more we start bumping into the institutional space, the more I realize that consistency is their number one aspect that they're looking at when they're going to put money behind a sponsor. I've heard them use terms like cookie cutter, rinse and repeat.
Yep.
These types of things are what large money is looking for. And I think a lot of people misunderstand, let's say institutional from the beginning, like, oh, well, they're willing to take a lot lower return because they're on a pension fund or something like that. Like, no, they're not actually willing to take a lower return for the same projects that are extremely low risk and consistency over yield any day of the week. And that over the last few years has been a good teacher to me about what should be most important to me when I'm running a deal on a level of expertise, but also when I'm investing in someone else. Consistency is king.
Yeah. And it's the risk reward consists, right? So you mentioned pension funds. When they go outside of the market, it's because they're looking for asymmetrical returns to the market. So when markets crash, whatever percentage of the portfolios that's in alternatives, it's not moving with that same
Mhm.
fluctuation as the stock market. So yeah, you're right. And they're getting into other like life companies and pension funds. They've got payouts they need to make. So that's why they're looking for the consistency. If they know they can get a 7 yield, an 8 yield, a 9 yield all day long because they've got to make payouts. But why shouldn't you be copying them as an investor?
Yes.
I'm not saying don't have money in the stock market. I'm saying, hey, if consistently have bills you need to pay, maybe you should be investing for consistent returns to pay those bills instead of this should bring in 15 and 18 yields. And don't get me wrong, just because we put out deals at 16, 17 in yields, we still do because we're growing our investor base and we have to. Just because we have yields at that doesn't mean that we're not a good sponsor. I'm not saying anyone that has higher yields is not a good sponsor. I'm saying if you find a good sponsor and their yields do come down, that doesn't mean they're keeping more for themselves. It might mean they're sharing a little more, but it might also mean they're buying better quality deals
Mhm.
in an effort to be a more consistent sponsor. They're
Yeah.
taking on less risk, and by default, it's putting your money at less risk.
And I also like working with sponsors who are not raising capital for a deal because they need an acquisition fee, because
Yeah.
that's how their business is basically making deals, like you said. Which I love doing, you love doing, but I don't take acquisition fees on most of my deals just because we have other sources of passive income. We basically reinvest that back into the deal. I feel like if I was chasing an acquisition fee in order to keep my lights on, then that would compromise my ability to be making best decisions on behalf of the fund and the investors in that fund. How do you feel? I don't have a problem with acquisition fees, and I don't have a problem with people doing this full time. I think people who are doing it full time are really focused, but I do see a lot of operators raising money for deals they probably shouldn't be because they need that next act fee to pay the bills.
Yeah. So I agree with you. We do have acquisition fees. That is how we pay keep the lights on. It's not why we do deals. In fact, people come to us all the time. So why don't you just have a fund? And we probably could go raise a lot of money for a fund. In fact, I know we could. The reason I don't want to do it, and I've had funds in the past for distressed debt, we've had funds
Mhm.
because we know we could put it to work. But that's also where I learned the concept of cash drag, because there was a time where we raised a lot of money for a distressed debt fund and then we couldn't put it to work. And then it becomes a question, and the storage it'd be even more difficult. But then it becomes a question of, I have the money. Is this a good deal? Or am I doing this deal because I have the money? So in self storage, I don't want to have a fund for the types of deals that we do, the value add deals, because if I just go through the last 6 years, I've bought 3 deals in a year. I've bought 7 in a year. I've bought 4 in a year. We look at over 1,000 deals a year. We probably only put out 20, 25 offers. And the most we bought in one year was 7, averaged 4 or 5 deals. If I had a fund of $10 million, I'm not saying we would put it all to work. I'm saying as an investor, if I'm investing in a sponsor who has all this money to put to work, I have to question their motives.
Yes.
The great deal, or was it a marginal deal and they had a lot of money, so they put it to work and made some acquisition fees?
Mm.
No one should ever question for my company when we put out a deal. And I tell this to investors all the time, when we put out a deal, it's a deal. And it's a deal that we believe will achieve the projections we said it will achieve. You know that because we only put out so many.
Yeah. Well, you're talking
Might
about
have
that.
fees to pay for our overhead and everything,
Mhm.
but we're not putting out 20, 30 deals a year. We're putting out 4, 5, 6, 7 maybe.
But you're speaking to the heart of the motivation. So I'm talking about the operator who's maybe financially struggling a little bit and they have to go do a deal because they need that acquisition fee. But you are also mentioned another motivation where you have a pile of cash, which is why you feel like we need to put this money to work. And so just buying a deal to buy a deal, no matter what the reason is. And that's one of the reasons when we formulated our fund is we centered it around hard money with multifamily kind of on the side because I did not want to have a pile of money sitting there waiting for a good multifamily deal because they've kind of been bad the last few years. They're waiting for a deal and then we just go buy something because we have money to put to work. I'm super, super picky and we raise for each deal individually, this similar to what you're saying, because I never want to buy a deal because I either have money sitting there that's expecting to be put to
Yeah,
work or because I need the money. I need the points from the loan or I need the acquisition fee. Is those you're speaking to those underlying motivations. I think that's really important to look at when you're evaluating why a sponsor is doing what they're doing.
100%. That again goes back to the sponsor. Earlier, so what's the most important letter? It's the S. I've got to know everything about the sponsor. I have to know their motivations. I have to know how they operate. I have to know if they know what they're doing. But to the motivations, how are you operating? Why are you doing deals?
Mm.
Is it because you have a fund? Funds provide diversification. I'm not beating up all funds either. I'm just saying these are the things you need to know as a passive investor.
Yeah.
Some
Yeah.
funds are fantastic. I am not saying we won't have a fund someday. I don't want a fund now because I don't have visibility into unlimited deal flow that I love. And because I don't have visibility into unlimited deal flow that I'm going to love, there's no need for me to have a fund. I'm saying to my investors, when I put out one deal at a time, it's a deal every time.
Yeah.
And that's
And we see the problem kind of reversed when we get to the point where you have large funds who have $100 million they need to place. They're really struggling to find great deals because they do have money kind of burning a hole in their pocket and they have to go find really great deals to put into. And they have way more money. They have deals. And the smaller the operator gets, it reverses. It's like, I have all these deals, but I don't have enough capital of my own or investor capital to go and doing it. And as those piles of money get bigger and bigger, the problem starts to cross over. Do you have more deals than money or do you have more money than deals? And I see that happening a lot of times as people grow bigger and they have more people saying, "Hey, I trust you with my money." And then they're like, "I don't have enough deals to put all this money to work."
totally. And that's, and I sound like a broken record, but that's where it comes down to who is the sponsor and how do they operate? How long have they been operating? If you were to look at our company, just as an example, because I know ours, you would see, ask us, what's your track record? How many deals did you buy? What was the motivation for them? Why did you buy them? Why didn't you buy them? There's a story in every operating year that we have that I could tell you. I mean, I'm not going to, I won't get into it now, but even through 22 and 23, those were challenging years. The interest rates went through the roof, right? So you, again, I'm a broken record. It really comes down to getting to know that sponsor, whether it's you were referred to them or whether you get on the phone with them. I mean, look, there's no sponsor that at least I don't think there are too many sponsors out there that are options to invest in where you can't really have access to level management, right? If they're that big, they probably went public to the public markets.
Mm.
They're not accessible to you as someone at a high level that can answer these types of questions that I'm laying out, then maybe they're not a good fit. I don't know. I believe, and me personally, I want to talk to who I'm investing in. I want to know who I'm investing in. It really just comes down to that.
Yeah.
I'm trusting you with my money. Yeah, I want to know what you're going to do with it. But at the end of the day, I need to know that you're competent and trustworthy. And it really just comes down to that. And then from there, it's okay. I've got 3 competent spot, and there's plenty of us out there. It's not a small club. There's plenty of us. Once I'm through the S, okay, all right, I'm going to go to Emma for my hard money loans, and maybe Emma for my multifamily, and I'm going to go over here for that. So if I'm down to a couple sponsors I don't know, but they all seem to check. All right, maybe the asset class matters, or hey, this one's a 10-year time horizon, and I don't want to be in something that long. So maybe the time horizon. But now I'm on the exit. I'm all the way at the
Yeah.
E. I got to
Mhm.
put an S, A, and F first before I get to the. Those are high class problems right at the end. It means I've got lots of options.
Yeah, it's a great way to look at it, and I feel like it's very comprehensive, yet being short. It's like kinda check these boxes and go through. There's a lot of detail in that that can be overwhelming to investors, and I like the way that you break it down, some of the most important things to be looking at. So, I feel like there's so much more we could be talking, like nitty-gritty on self-storage,
We could do this
like
on the beach for 9 days.
seriously, seriously. Wrap it up, please, by just telling me about your future plans because a lot of our listeners don't like the word retirement either. And they really aren't seeing themselves spending hours and hours and months and years on a beach either. What does your life look like? Because your youngest is 12, my youngest is also 12. And so we're kind of looking at this 10-year horizon of really
Yep,
being empty nesters. What does an empty nest look like for you in 10 to 12 years?
that's scary looking, right? Well, I you just put the fear of God in me. Because my life is so busy right now because of my kids are active. So I'm like the world's most underpaid Uber driver. Although
Yeah.
I told you my daughter's got her driver's license. So there's one down. I'm not driving to dance, but now I'm shuttling between lacrosse, football, and basketball. What is, gosh, so 10 years. My youngest is out of college or in college, out of college. I think I'm probably more in an advisory role. So we're launching the third thing we do in our company is we're launching development projects. So we're taking another niche in self storage, and it's a B2B niche. But 10 years from now, that should be fully launched and deployed, and we should have a couple hundred of these B2B storage facilities out there. We call pro storage. So hopefully, if that's successful, I'm going to will it to be, then I'll have more money. I'll have more passive income. I'll have more stockpiles of cash.
Mhm.
I'll probably be spending my time being an active passive investor, meaning checking out, following my own advice.
Aware,
I'll say,
aware.
what's that?
You're an aware passive investor.
Where
You
I'll
yeah.
be viewing sponsors and making sure
Mhm,
that they're going to be good stewards of my money. I also see myself probably being more charitable, or at
mhm.
least I don't mean just writing checks, involved maybe in causes that move me. Right now, those causes have names, and I
Mm,
have to pay for them. And then eventually, so the youngest is 22 at that point. So then the oldest 35 and 26. Hopefully, my dream would be to be involved there if they want to be entrepreneurial, right? And
mhm.
then if I've done my job as a parent, they will be as much as they want to be, right? I
Yeah,
don't force anything on anybody, but I hope to be like the strategic advisor to them and helping them drive their dreams and grow as young adults. And that's to me called financial freedom, not retirement. It's just the ability to determine how my day goes and or my week. And certainly within weaving through all that is traveling the world. I'm sure I'll still want to be doing that and other leisure activities. Probably not. You probably won't find me pinned down in any one place doing the same thing over and over. I think I'm a pretty curious person, and I'm constantly on a journey of learning. So I'm sure you'll see that weave woven throughout whatever my day or week looks like as well.
yeah.
Maybe
That's
I'll come back and becoming a therapist or whoever we're telling me.
yeah, I think you became a family therapist, but I I mean,
I
my
don't know.
in-laws
Actually, that sounds like work.
yeah. Well, I mean, but it's what you said before, you mentioned something really important. It's like, what is passive for one person is not passive
Yeah.
for
It's all
an
relative.
another person. Yeah, I'm watching my in-laws just turned 80. My parents have both passed away, and watching how, they spend their time now is fascinating. They built their own house. They're constantly going over to people's houses, help them fix cars, houses, watch kids. Like, when you become our age, life starts to get a little bit more unpredictable,
It does.
especially with people very close to you. We've had some catastrophic happenings in our family with people passing away unexpectedly and people getting unexpected illnesses or injuries. It's just one of those things. It's where their ability to kind of just step back and be able to keep an eye on things and say, this person is having a baby, we're going there. This person has a serious illness, we're going there. And then when they built their own house, everybody came over to them and helped them build their house. And it's been a really beautiful vision of watching what life can be like with financial freedom and time freedom in their 80s and watching how they're keeping themselves mentally and physically fit. Like there are good things. There are good things to come.
What you just described as I'm laughing as you were saying is all I could think of was the Amish. We're all
Yeah.
on a journey to trying to become the Amish,
Yeah.
especially with thing, and they all came together to build a house.
I'm putting that on a poster, like, on my wall here. It's like my retirement goal is to become Amish because it's
Become
like,
Amish, right?
yeah, you gotta stay fit, you gotta walk everywhere, you gotta work with your hands, you gotta keep your mind active, and that
Yo,
you're talking about becoming more charitable and serving others, and
yeah.
they really embody that, and I think you and I, who they're very hard workers, right? But I'm seeing the evolution of that hard work different out, and I think that's really beautiful what you're describing, something kinda similar in, like, 30 years instead of 10 years, but yeah, this is what life is about.
Yeah, and by the way, you weren't there at one point, and I wasn't there at one point. But what I always try to tell people too, especially when I sit on stage in front of them, is like, I'm not that smart. If I can do it, you can do it. The only difference between the two of us is I took that first step, which I think may be hard for people to take. Like maybe
Mhm.
there's fear involved, maybe the fear of the unknown, but it doesn't have to be unknown. You don't have to quit your day job to start to learn about what your next part of your life could be like,
I
right?
did. I had to get kicked out of my you know, like,
So
I would never
that
have
comes
made the
down to
change.
motivation, right? So you needed the motivation to do that.
Yes.
And I'm not saying that you're crazy for
It was
that.
not by
There
choice.
are
Yeah.
many people like you that need some sort of different
True.
motivation. All I'm
Mhm.
saying is you don't have to lose your job. You
Yes.
don't have to quit your job to start to listen to a podcast, go to a real estate meetup group, to go to an academy somewhere. You just need to take a couple days off,
Mhm.
right? You don't need to make major changes in your life to start to learn about how your life could change.
Yes. That's a good point because that's what it took for me was a
You could
big
do it all from
catastrophic
your dining
life
room
change.
table. I'm sorry to cut you off. You could do it all from your dining room table,
Yeah.
watch TED Talks or YouTube. There's so much. We live in the age of information.
Mhm.
So much out there. I'm not saying you rely solely on that because you can't get it's hard to get wisdom just through videos and information, right? So wisdom's important. That's where coaching and mentoring comes in. But there's so much information out there. You have to want to make a
Mhm.
change, whatever that change looks like for you. And that's why I say it's all relative, what's passive and what's active. It's all relative to us. A little change from completely head down W2, go home and watch network TV all night. Like watching this podcast is a big change. Whereas for you and I, like we consume that information all the time because we're already there. We want that information. We yearn for that information, something new, whether it's about mobile home parks or ARCs or whatever ATMs. You and I have been enlightened enough to want more. And all I'm saying is you don't have to be Emma and you don't have to be Joe Downs. Seek out that information. You don't have to quit your day job. You don't have to just start somewhere. That's what I'm saying. And listening to this podcast is the start.
Yeah, it's an excellent point that you make because people collect information now the way that we used to collect books, shelves of books and never really did anything with. So information in this day and age should never be the reason that we're not doing something. It's just one of those things that we need to figure out how to take action and learn by actually doing. And so listening to people like us and participating in podcasts, it's just so vital to then go out and make those connections and get that network that you need to have. And so Joe, how do people network with you? How do they get a hold of you after the show?
So either actually the best way to get a hold of me if people are interested in learning more and scheduling even time to talk with me is through Sam Lowry. So I'm going to give her email address. So that's what she would schedule anything. So it's Sam at belroseam.com. So SAM. It sounded weird the way I said it. Sam, like you would think Sam is spelled at Belrose AM. So Belrose is one L. It's BELROSE. A as an asset, M as in management.com, roseam.com.
If you're watching on YouTube, we'll have that on the screen and also down in the show notes if you're listening to it on your podcast recorder. So would love to have you reach out after the show because like I said, networking and actually getting together with people and doing projects is the only way you're really going to learn how to do this. It's like trying to learn how to play basketball or how to play piano by watching videos. It's just never really going to happen. And so we want to help you along that journey.
You gotta surround yourself with the people that are doing it, right? You're the
Yeah.
average 5 people that you hang out with, right? If you're hanging out with 5 people that are sitting at home watching they go to work 9 to 5 and then go home and watch network TV all night, that's you should expect your life to continue that way. If you hang out if Emma and I are in your circle of 5, you should expect different stories and different life experiences. And I think by osmosis, then that not only should inspire you, but when you become a different person and next thing you know, you're hosting your own podcast, you're investing in your own deal.
Yeah. 10 years ago, I did not see this as my life. And we're talking long term though. Like this is not a get rich quick thing, whatever you want to call it. This is a commitment that takes time to watch and execute and learn. And we're getting better every single day. And so my kids are getting tired of me calling them out on stuff. And so sometimes it's nice to be able to have a podcast and have people in my life that we can have real conversations about this kind of stuff. And it's what I love doing. I honestly
Yeah.
like just podcasts all day.
You
That's what I would do.
you know what my answer I'm gonna add to my answer from 10 years from now is I wanna host my I wanna be able to do what you do. I'm jealous. You get to talk to so many different people.
Yeah.
And that's a goal of mine is to be able to talk to so many different I don't know what the angle will be, but I just like talking to people and I love learning about different experiences. I met a guy yesterday who, while I was in Buffalo, I was coming back, we had breakfast. He runs carnivals. He's a
Mm.
carny. He jokingly, he's like, "I'm a carny," but he runs carnivals up and down, mostly in the Southeast and, a
Yeah.
little bit Mid-Atlantic, but what a fascinating job. I could have talked for 3 hours. He wanted to talk about investing in storage with me. I'm like, "That's boring. Let's talk
You
about
get
this."
those things on and off the truck. Yeah, and that's what I love about the show is just that everybody learning from stories, and I'll just quickly when I used to be a real estate photographer as my business before, and going into the homes and meeting the people, and whether they were home or not, just the stories that those homes told, and when they were there, like, "What where are you moving to? Why are you selling the house?" And you start to see patterns over and over again, but at the same time, everybody had a unique story, and I felt like that was the most fascinating part of what I did. I could go to a house in the same neighborhood that was the same floor plan even, and that house is telling me a different story just because there are different people that live there. And so this podcast is really my way of going and sharing other people's stories and having us be able to identify with them and learn from them to say, like you said, "Oh, I'm not the smartest person in the room. If I can do it, you can do it." That's really the essence of what this show is all about.
This is one of my favorites. We just talk,
Right.
and I guess you're recorded.
Yeah. Yeah. We're just recording the conversation and hopefully people will learn something along.
All this all like me. I could do this all day.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much
Awesome.
for being a guest on the show. The longer I do this, the more at the end of each conversation, I'm like, oh, we have to stop, but it's like an hour. So maybe
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
have you back next year and do it again.
Dude, this has been great. Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Thank you so much. And then be sure to reach out at Sam's email and get in touch with me. Investwithemma.com takes you straight to my calendar, free 30 minutes. And don't forget to come to my free meeting every Monday night, riseclubcapital.com, where we just look at deals and decide if we like them and if we want to invest them or not. And that is the best way, again, to learn by doing. Like these are real deals that we are making real decisions about in our own fund and basically open it up to the public and help you be able to invest in those deals either on your own or through us really is open to anybody, whether you're an active investor, passive investor, it has something there for everybody and lets you really get hands-on with the deal eval. So Joe would love to have you present a deal there to us sometime.
I would love to, but may I ask a question which will help you promote your fund, but also
Fire away.
answer my questions? Is it does your fund invest just in multifamily?
No, we do mostly hard money loans. We have
Oh,
a
hard
self-storage
okay.
unit that we're loaned on right now in Texas. And then occasionally we'll do an equity deal in industrial or multifamily are the two things that we're looking at. And multifamily includes mobile home parks. We have a long-term RV park, multifamily, and then some sort of industrial, either self-storage or triple net leasing. So we like to diversify. We don't run all of those. We are doing the same thing that any passive investor is
You
doing, finding
you
great operators.
you're finding great operators, great.
Yep.
And if I'm an investor in your fund, because now I'm considering it because I invest too. 1, would you pass my safe test? I'm kidding. Of course
Yeah.
you would. 2, what kind of return could I expect, and what is the frequency?
I need to have you come and interview me on my podcast often. So basically, it's 6-month note terms.
Okay.
Um, and sometimes they'll renew and go into the 12 months, but they usually are paid back sometime in that 6 to 9 month period. For investors who are putting in more than 200,000, it's a 12% return. So basically, they keep all the interest and we keep the points, the origination points that we use to
Okay.
service the loan. And then for anybody investing less than 200,000, it's a 10% rate of return. And that way
You're keeping a
people
little bit of a spread. So you're
a
lending
little
a
bit
couple
spread.
points, 12%?
Yep,
Okay.
exactly. And we don't ever borrow money to
Do
lend money.
So if I'm a
So
$200,000 investor, should I expect within a reasonable starting time frame, are you paying me 1% a month, essentially?
yes, it's
Okay.
1% a month, and it could be most people choose to take it as a balloon payment at the end and then reinvest that if they don't need the cash flow right away. But we have a few people who are retired who are putting in larger dollar amounts that need to basically, it's like the more money you bring, the more conversation and negotiation power you have, which is exactly what we're doing in the club. What do we want to make this deal work? If you bring in enough chunk of cash, then you can start having those negotiated conversations with the operator or with us directly, like, here's what I need. We'll do our best to make that happen.
Can I put another ball on a tee for you? This is fun. I'm practicing for my future
Mm.
here. If I have a self-directed IRA, can I invest with you?
Yeah, and actually that's one of our biggest pushes because interest income, tax benefits is taxed as ordinary income. So people in high tax brackets who have hard money loans out there are basically just increasing their taxable income. And so
Mhm.
it's really nice to be able to have an IRA where you can invest in there. You can't use depreciation in your IRA. It's already tax advantaged. I mean, there are a few minor exceptions to that, but usually people who are looking for big tax advantages are looking to invest in something that has depreciation, right? But if they have an IRA, they can't use the depreciation. So we usually say invest in cash for depreciation. That way you can hopefully offset active income if you qualify. Most people don't. But if you can offset active income with depreciation, you should take advantage of every dime of that. But since most people can't use the depreciation to offset their active income, and you can't use it inside your IRA. It's like when you're earning ordinary income inside an IRA, it's a win-win because you are either deferring those taxes or growing it tax-free if you've done a Roth conversion. That all of that interest income comes back to you when you retire and is very tax advantage. So yes, we deal with a lot of self-directed IRAs.
Very cool. Now let me ask a question, if I may.
Yeah.
Are you still vetting new sponsors? Like, for instance, you said, "We'd love to have you pitch a deal."
Yes, we are narrowing down our list. We'd like to have about 3 to maybe 5 in each asset class, and we just don't ever look at anybody else unless, say, 5 years from now, there's somebody who's new, but we really like working with people who've been doing this for a while. So if
So
they're around
so let's
now.
take my company, for instance, but
Yeah.
I'm really asking for all sponsors listening.
Mhm.
If we could pass the S part of the
Yeah.
safe, so it's your prerequisite, everybody out there.
Yeah.
What kind of check size does the fund write, or what's the minimum, what's the maximum from a sponsor
Mhm.
standpoint? So I'm
Yeah.
pitching my deal. Am I too big, if I have $1 million equity raise, where do I fit in your world? And how much of that, if you loved the deal and you loved us, would you be interested in?
So on lending, we're only doing about $1 million right now, and we'll only do that under first lien. And so we're not doing any mezzanine debt and we're not doing any second lien kind of stuff. So $1 million first lien. So it's usually smaller properties.
Mhm.
On the commercial side or the equity side, we'll do a million to maybe up to 2 million if we absolutely loved it. And so what we find there, because there's no position, you just take a portion of that equity and we don't need to worry. So it could be a $10 million raise and we would just bring in, say, $1 million of that. So that's about the check size that we're writing right now, which puts us in a nice position. I
Yeah.
feel like when I was raising capital, there weren't really very many funds that would write $1 million check. It's either the retail doing 50, 100,000 at a time, or when you get into the institutional, 5 to 10 million was considered small in that world. And so that 1 to
Yeah.
5-ish $1 million check size is tough to find.
It's very tough to find. That's why I was asking the question for the
Yeah.
sponsors. Yeah. No, that's great. So if you're an investor, I mean, I'm getting diversification and a pretty healthy, I think a very, very healthy yield. And if I'm a sponsor, you're certainly someone I want to try to get in front of. So that's
Exactly.
great.
Exactly. And that's one thing that I like about the debt versus say the equity. We keep enough equity around that we can get the depreciation. We can use it. We're full-time real estate investors. We can use every dime of depreciation every single year. And so we keep enough of that around to basically offset our income taxes. But from just a raw return standpoint, like we do better in the private money because not every equity deal goes according to plan. And so it takes a while. If you don't get your full investment amount back, maybe you've lost a little bit of money. And we're not even talking about losing the entire thing. We're just talking about if something's returning at negative rates of return. It takes a long time to recover from that. And so we've found that for us, you mentioned something about just reliable cash flow. This is our cash flow. And we're
Yeah.
actually outperforming on the debt side than we are on the equity side, at least over the last, say, 24 months.
No, it's fascinating.
Yeah,
Sounds like it's something I should check out.
definitely. So, well, I would love to, if you're an accredited investor and you're listening, would love to help you put your money to work. It's like the easiest money you'll ever make.
Yeah, it sounds like it. I'm
So,
definitely interested.
all right. Well, thanks everybody for sticking around and really looking forward to hearing from you after the show. That's really the reason we do this is so that we can form a relationship with people after the show. So be sure to reach out and we will see you on the next episode.
Thanks, Emma.
Thanks so much, Joe.